Kwame grew up in Accra with his mother, Amma. His father had passed away when he was just a boy, and Amma did her best to raise him with love and discipline. Life was not always easy, but Kwame learned to be patient and hardworking. When Amma later remarried, Kwame found himself living with Oba Mensah, a man who carried himself with loud confidence but very little substance. Oba liked to boast about his big ideas, importing cars, starting a shipping business, opening luxury shops. But none of his dreams ever went beyond talk. What he lacked in money and credibility, he made up for in arrogance. He would sneer at Kwame at every opportunity, reminding him that he was just a boy with no achievements. One evening, Oba brought up a new plan. He wanted to take out a bank loan to fund a grand project. But the bank didn't trust him, and he needed someone with a cleaner record to co-sign. He turned to Kwame, grinning like he had already won. "You're just a broke boy," Oba said, his voice dripping with scorn. "Be useful for once. Sign the papers." Kwame sat still, his jaw tight. He had learned over the years that answering arrogance with anger only gave it more power. Instead, he spoke quietly, his words steady but firm. "No, I won't sign it." Oba laughed mockingly, as if Kwame's refusal was a joke. But behind Kwame's calm eyes, there was a quiet strength that Oba had never noticed, and would soon regret. When Kwame refused to co-sign the loan, Oba did not let it go. Instead, he turned his attention to Amma, twisting the story to make Kwame look like the problem. "Your son is selfish," Oba told her in a low, accusing tone. "I try to build a future for this family, and he stands in the way. Is this the boy you raised? Ungrateful, stubborn, disrespectful?" Amma was caught in the middle. She loved her husband, but Kwame was her only son. Oba's words pressed hard on her heart, and she felt torn. She asked Kwame why he refused, hoping he might soften. But Kwame, calm as always, shook his head. "Mama, I won't ruin my future for his greed. I'm thinking ahead, not just for myself, but for us. Please understand." His voice was gentle, but there was no doubt he meant every word. Oba, however, was not done. He carried the story to the extended family, making Kwame sound like a disobedient child. Soon whispers spread. Kwame had embarrassed his stepfather. Kwame thought he was too wise. Kwame did not respect tradition. Aunties, uncles, and cousins repeated the gossip, some laughing, some shaking their heads. When Kwame walked into family gatherings, he could feel their eyes on him, judging silently. The tension finally boiled over at a large family dinner. The room was filled with chatter and clinking plates when Oba, as if waiting for his moment, raised his voice so everyone could hear. He looked straight at Kwame, smirking. "This boy," he announced, "is a child afraid of responsibility. He thinks refusing to help makes him wise, but really it makes him useless." Laughter broke out around the table, some forced, some genuine. Amma lowered her eyes, embarrassed, while Kwame sat in silence. The words stung, but he refused to give Oba the satisfaction of a reaction. He simply placed his spoon down and looked at his stepfather with steady eyes. Inside, the room was buzzing with mockery and judgment, but in Kwame's heart, there was only quiet determination. He knew the truth would speak louder than insults, and one day, the same family that mocked him would see who he really was. Oba was not the kind of man to accept defeat. When Kwame refused to co-sign the loan, he marched to the bank anyway, and found a way to sign the papers under his own name. He convinced himself that this was his chance to finally prove everyone wrong. The moment the money hit his account, Oba's life changed overnight, or at least, that's how it looked from the outside. He bought a sleek car that turned heads on the streets of Accra, the kind of car people slowed down to stare at. He filled his wardrobe with designer suits and gold watches, parading around like a man of great success. In the OSU district, he threw flashy parties at rooftop lounges, buying rounds of drinks for anyone willing to raise a glass in his honor. His laughter was loud, his speeches even louder. "This is just the beginning," he declared to crowds of friends and strangers. "Soon, I will be one of Ghana's biggest businessmen." For a while, people believed him. Neighbors admired his sudden rise. Family members who once mocked him whispered that maybe Oba had been right all along. Even Amma, though cautious, could not help but feel relieved that things finally seemed to be going well. Only Kwame remained silent, watching with calm eyes as Oba built his castle in the air. But castles built on sand never last. Within months, the cracks began to show. The business plan Oba had bragged about was nothing more than an idea with no foundation. Suppliers pulled out, contracts fell through, and expenses piled up faster than he could control. The car payments were overdue, the parties stopped, and the same friends who once cheered for him stopped answering his calls. Soon, creditors began circling. Men in sharp suits appeared at the house, demanding repayment. The bank started calling every week, their tone shifting from polite reminders to stern warning. Letters arrived with bold red stamps, each one heavier than the last. At night, Amma would see Oba pacing the living room, his forehead damp with sweat, his phone pressed tightly to his ear as he tried to talk his way out of disaster. Still, Oba refused to drop his act. In public, he walked with his chest out, telling anyone who asked that everything was under control. He dismissed the creditors as small matters, as if debts of thousands of Sadies could be brushed aside like dust. But behind closed doors, his arrogance was cracking. The same man who once mocked Kwame for being a broke boy was now drowning in debt he could not escape. Kwame, meanwhile, said nothing. He watched Oba's downfall unfold step by step, his silence sharper than any insult. The storm Oba had created was finally closing in, and no amount of pride could stop what was coming. While Oba was busy showing off borrowed wealth, Kwame was living a very different kind of life. To most people, he looked like a quiet young man with little going on. He didn't wear fancy clothes or drive a big car. He walked through across busy streets like any other ordinary worker, taking trotros and blending into the crowd. But behind that quiet life was a story that almost nobody knew. Years earlier, after his father's passing, Kwame had received a small inheritance. It wasn't much by the standards of big businessmen, but to him, it was precious, a seed he wanted to plant carefully. While his friends spent money on new phones and night outs, Kwame spent his nights reading about technology, startups, and the future of Africa's digital economy. That was when he discovered a small, struggling company called Afritech Solutions. At the time, nobody believed in Afritech. People laughed at the idea that a Ghanaian startup could compete with global tech companies. Even Oba mocked him when he first mentioned it. So you want to waste money on a group of dreamers? Oba sneered, but Kwame ignored the noise. Something about the company's vision, the way they talked about connecting businesses, building apps, and training young coders, sparked his belief. He invested quietly, buying shares and holding on to them when others gave up. In the years that followed, Kwame lived simply, working at a small tech startup himself. His salary was modest, but he gained knowledge, skills, and connections that strengthened his confidence. Every morning, while Oba chased quick schemes, Kwame sat in crowded offices, typing lines of code, attending late-night brainstorming sessions, and watching Afritech grow slowly but surely. And then the boom came. Afritech Solutions hit a breakthrough, securing international partnerships and drawing in big investors. The company's value skyrocketed, and the shares that Kwame had bought years ago, when nobody else believed, turned into gold. Without announcing it to the world, Kwame had quietly become a majority shareholder. His stake wasn't small. It gave him influence, power, and the kind of wealth Oba could only dream about. But Kwame kept this hidden. He never bragged, never changed his lifestyle, never used his position to prove anyone wrong. To him, wealth was not something to flaunt, but a responsibility. He believed in humility, in moving silently while building something real. Even Amma, his own mother, didn't fully understand how far Kwame had gone. So while Oba was drowning in debt, Kwame was already standing on solid ground. He had the security of Afritech behind him, the respect of people in the tech world, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had built something lasting. Yet he chose to stay silent, waiting for the right time. He understood something Oba never did. True strength doesn't shout. It waits, steady and patient, until the world can no longer ignore it. Oba's debts were closing in on him like waves, but he refused to admit defeat. Instead, he came up with a plan that he believed would save his pride and buy him more time. He scheduled a meeting at the bank, dressing himself in his sharpest suit, polishing his shoes until they gleamed. He walked with the swagger of a man who wanted the world to think he was in control. But behind his confident smile was pure desperation. That morning, he called for Kwame. "You're coming with me," he ordered, leaving no room for refusal. Amma looked worried, but Kwame simply nodded. He didn't argue, didn't ask questions. He knew Oba's game, and if Oba wanted to drag him along, he would go, but on his own terms. The bank's tall glass doors reflected the city traffic outside as the two men walked in. Oba's voice grew louder as they entered, as though he wanted everyone in the lobby to hear him. "This is business," he boasted, straightening his tie. "Big business." Kwame followed quietly, his calm presence a sharp contrast to Oba's loud performance. When they sat down with the banker, Oba leaned back in his chair like a king addressing his servant. He spread out papers on the table, explaining his vision with grand gestures, promising returns that sounded too good to be true. The banker listened politely, though his eyes betrayed doubt. Then Oba turned to Kwame, smirking. "This boy here," he said, waving dismissively, "is my wife's son. He owns nothing, he is nothing, but at least he can be useful today. He will co-sign and stand by me as a son should. Isn't that right?" His words cut through the room like a knife, sharp with mockery. The banker shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Kwame. It was clear he was curious about the young man Oba was belittling. Kwame, however, showed no anger. He didn't flinch, didn't argue. He simply sat with his hands folded, his face calm and unreadable. Oba laughed, mistaking Kwami's silence for weakness. You see? He says nothing because he knows his place. I am the businessman here. He is just a shadow. But Kwami was not silent because he was weak. He was silent because he was waiting. The arrogance spilling from Oba's mouth no longer stung him. It only revealed how blind the man truly was. Deep inside, Kwami knew the balance of power in that room was about to shift, and when it did, no amount of Oba's boasting could cover the truth. So he stayed quiet, watching Oba perform like an actor on stage, letting him dig his own hole deeper. The banker cleared his throat, prepared to speak, and Kwami's calm eyes flickered with a quiet certainty. The storm Oba thought he controlled was about to turn, and Kwami was ready. The room was still buzzing with Oba's loud voice when the banker suddenly shifted his attention. Instead of replying to Oba's endless boasting, he looked straight at Kwami and gave a small, respectful nod. Good morning, Mr. Mensa, he said warmly. It's an honor to finally meet you in person. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Oba froze, blinking in confusion. His confident smile faltered, and his eyes darted between the banker and Kwami. For a moment, it was as if the world had tilted, and only he didn't understand what was happening. Kwami, calm as ever, simply nodded back. He didn't need to say a word. The banker reached into a folder and carefully spread out several documents across the table. The crisp white papers carried bold company logos and official seals. He slid them toward Kwami, not Oba. These are the updated shareholder reports for Afritech Solutions, the banker explained, his tone professional but tinged with respect. As you know, sir, you remain the majority shareholder. Before we proceed with any requests, we require your approval. Oba's jaw dropped. He stared at the documents, his face draining of color. The same company he had once mocked, the same waste of money he laughed at years ago, was now staring back at him in black and white, owned and controlled by the quiet young man he had spent years insulting. Wait, what is this? Oba stammered, his voice cracking. This must be some mistake. My stepson? A shareholder? The banker adjusted his glasses and spoke firmly. Not just a shareholder, the major shareholder, Afritech's primary account holder. Every decision runs through him. Then, turning back to Kwami with full attention, he asked the question that sealed the moment. Sir, as the primary account holder, do you approve this request? The silence in the room was deafening. Oba's fingers trembled as he tried to process what was happening. The man who had bragged about his power only minutes ago now sat speechless, his pride collapsing in front of the very person he had called useless. Kwami leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, almost gentle. He didn't gloat. He didn't rush to speak. His quietness carried more weight than any insult Oba had ever thrown at him. Oba's lips quivered, searching for words, but nothing came out. He looked small now, stripped of his arrogance, his grand suit doing nothing to hide the fear in his eyes. For the first time, the balance had shifted completely. The banker waited patiently for Kwami's answer, the entire room holding its breath. And in that silence, the truth settled heavily on Oba's shoulders. The boy he had mocked, dismissed, and humiliated was the one holding all the power. Oba's throat went dry as the banker's words echoed in the room. He forced out a shaky laugh, trying to act as though everything was just a misunderstanding. Ah, this is funny, he said, waving his hand dramatically. Surely there is some mix-up. My stepson? The major shareholder? No, you must be mistaken. He's just a boy. He knows nothing about real business. But the banker didn't smile. His face remained serious, his tone firm and professional. There is no mistake, Mr. Mensa. All the records are clear. Afritech Solutions recognizes Kwami Mensa as the majority shareholder. He is our client. You, however, the banker paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, are listed only as a debtor, and your repayment is overdue. The weight of those words hit Oba like a hammer. His fake smile collapsed, his face pale with shock. He looked at Kwami, as if expecting him to deny it, to save him, to step in. But Kwami's calm eyes gave him no escape. Kwami, Oba said quickly, his voice almost desperate now. Tell them you'll stand by me. We're family. Family helps each other. You can't just sit there and let me drown. For the first time, Kwami spoke. His voice was steady, not loud but unshakable. I won't bail you out, Oba. This is your debt, your decision, your consequence. I warned you. I won't ruin my future because of your greed. The silence that followed was heavy. Oba slumped back into his chair, his body trembling. The arrogance that once filled his voice was gone. He looked smaller, weaker, like a man who had suddenly aged years in minutes. News of the moment spread faster than fire. By the end of the week, whispers had reached the community. People who once admired Oba's flashy car and his loud parties now shook their heads when his name came up. All that show and nothing behind it, they said. Meanwhile, the boy he mocked is the real success. The very same relatives who once laughed at Kwami now avoided Oba. Friends stopped returning his calls. Even his closest drinking companions in OSU began to distance themselves. not wanting to be associated with a man whose empire had been nothing but smoke and mirrors. Oba, who had once walked through the streets with his chest out, now moved with his head down. The creditors didn't stop calling, and the banker's words kept replaying in his mind. You are just a debtor. His world, built on pride and lies, had finally collapsed. And the bitterest part of it all was that the man he had mocked as useless had never raised a hand against him. Kwame didn't destroy him, his own arrogance did. When the news finally reached home, Amma could hardly believe it. For years, she had worried about Kwame, thinking his quiet nature meant he was fragile, that maybe he lacked the strength to stand up for himself. She had listened to Oba's complaints, his insults, his endless stories about Kwame being stubborn or ungrateful. Even the extended family had joined in, mocking her son as if he were just a boy afraid of responsibility. But now the truth stood in front of her, too clear to deny. Kwame was not weak. He had been wise all along. She sat at the kitchen table in silence, her eyes brimming with tears as Kwame explained. He didn't boast. He didn't raise his voice. He simply told her about Afritech, about the shares he had bought years ago, about how his patience had finally borne fruit. I stayed quiet because I didn't need to prove myself, he said softly, looking at her with love. The truth always shows, Mama. Always. Amma reached for his hand, her heart swelling with pride and guilt at the same time. She had doubted him, even if only in her thoughts. Now, she saw him for who he truly was, a man of patience, intelligence, and deep strength. The relatives who had once laughed at Kwame quickly changed their tune. Suddenly, they were full of praise, calling him smart, visionary, even a role model. Ah, Kwame, we always knew you were different, some said, pretending they had never mocked him. They crowded around him at gathering, eager to claim connection to his success. Oba, however, could not hide his rage. Every word of praise for Kwame was like a dagger to his pride. He tried to dismiss it, muttering under his breath that it was just luck or a temporary success. But deep inside, he knew the truth had exposed him. He was furious, but he was powerless. His voice, once so loud, no longer carried any weight in the family. Even Amma, who once tried to defend him, now saw through him clearly. Kwame did not rub salt into the wound. He did not remind Oba of the insults, the humiliation, or the countless times he had been mocked. Instead, he carried himself with the same calm strength as always. To the relatives, to the community, and most importantly to his mother, that humility spoke louder than any revenge ever could. Amma held her son close one evening and whispered, I am so proud of you. And Kwame, with a small smile, replied, You raised me to be patient, Mama. That patience became my strength. The house felt different now. The balance had shifted. Oba's anger filled the corners like smoke, but it no longer controlled the air. The light was with Kwame, and everyone could see it. Oba's downfall came faster than even he expected. The bank wasted no time in reclaiming what was theirs. One morning, neighbors gathered on the roadside as men in suits and uniforms rolled up to the house. They drove away his flashy car, the one he had once paraded through town with the windows down, honking as if he owned the city. Now it was strapped onto a tow truck, leaving him standing in the dust, his expensive suit suddenly looking cheap. The rest of his assets followed. Furniture he had bought on credit was repossessed. His clothes, once symbols of wealth, now looked like costumes from a past life. Without money to fuel his arrogance, Oba began shrinking into himself. The man who used to laugh the loudest now avoided people, slipping through back alleys instead of strutting down the main road. He became a shadow, hiding from the same community he once tried to impress. Even Zulu, his closest friend and drinking partner, abandoned him. When Oba was throwing parties in OSU, Zulu was always at his side, raising his glass and praising him loudly. But when the creditors came knocking, Zulu disappeared. Calls went unanswered, visits stopped. Oba sat alone in bars where once he had been the center of attention, waiting for friends who never arrived. Meanwhile, Kwame's life was moving in the opposite direction. Word of his role in Afritech spread quickly. Universities, tech forums, and even business conferences began inviting him to speak. His story, of patience, foresight, and quiet strength, captured the imagination of many young people in Accra. They saw in him proof that success didn't always need noise, that real power could grow silently until it could no longer be ignored. Kwame stood on stages, not with arrogance but with humility. He spoke about believing in local talent, about investing in Africa's future, about how discipline was more valuable than showing off. The same relatives who had once mocked him now sat in the front row, clapping the loudest. His name became a source of pride in the community, a reminder that wisdom often hides behind silence. The contrast between the two men became a lesson everyone could see. Oba's loud rise and louder fall turned into a warning. Arrogance without substance leads only to shame. Kwame's calm and steady rise became an inspiration, proof that patience and vision outlast empty noise. In the markets, in Tierotras, in small family gatherings, people repeated the story. Did you hear what happened to Oba? And do you know what Kwame has become? It spread like a proverb, shaping the way people looked at success. Oba, once desperate for attention, now couldn't bear the eyes that followed him. Kwame, who never chased the spotlight, now carried it wherever he went. And everyone understood. One man had built his life on sand, the other on stone. One late afternoon, as the streets of Accra buzzed with the usual traffic and chatter, Kwame drove slowly past a small, run-down cafe. The paint on the walls was peeling, the chairs outside wobbled on uneven ground, and sitting there, hunched over a chipped glass of tea, was Oba. The man who once strutted in expensive suits now wore a faded shirt. His shoulders sagged, and his eyes carried the weight of 100 regrets. When he noticed the shiny black car slowing down, he looked up, and for a brief moment their eyes met. Embarrassment flashed across Oba's face. He shifted uncomfortably, as though wanting to disappear into the ground. He expected a smirk, a sharp word, maybe even open mockery from Kwame. But none came. Kwame only gave a small, polite nod and then pressed the accelerator, driving on without a word. There was no need for revenge, no need for insults. Oba had already been defeated by his own pride. Kwame's life, meanwhile, had taken a different path. Instead of chasing luxury, he began investing his wealth into scholarships and training programs for young entrepreneurs across Ghana. He wanted to give others the same chance he once gave himself, the chance to believe, to start small, and to grow. In classrooms and tech hubs, his name became a symbol of hope. To the young people he supported, Kwame was proof that humility and patience could change a life, a family, even a nation. And as the narrator closes the story, one truth remains. Sometimes the loudest mockery ends in silence. And silence is where true power grows.